All right, guys, it's my pleasure today to have Stan Efferding on the podcast. Stan is IFB Pro. He's the strongest IFB Pro bodybuilder, and you've also like had some powerlifting records in the past. You train a lot of top athletes like John Jones, Thor. So and you're someone that myself over the years, I have. Study the vertical diet and a lot of the things that you're putting out there, a lot of the research, a lot of the education are things that I've adopted to the way I coach my clients or the way that I eat myself personally. So I was pretty excited when I reached out to you, or I got Juji to reach out to you for me and see if we could have you on the podcast. And just because I love to educate people, and I think you just offer so much education and knowledge. So it's my pleasure to have you on the podcast today. So yeah, one of the major.
Thanks, brother. I'm joined here. Hey, I was just going to jump in and say I'm joined here by my co-author of the Vertical Diet, Dr. Damon McCune, who's a PhD, RDN, LD, and he was head of the dietetic department at UNLV, an instructor there in their exercise phys department. And yeah, you're right. I spent over 30 years competing and learning a lot of stuff by trial and error. And I thought to myself, with all of my anecdotes and all the testimonials, it was time to try and bump this up against the science. So I joined up with Damon a few years ago, and we went through this whole thing. We spent hundreds of hours together going through every aspect of this diet. And Damon compiled over 500 peer-reviewed, published scientific studies in journals to make sure that the information that we were giving was scientifically sound.
Wow, that's incredible because how like I come from a bodybuilding background. I know you do as well, along with powerlifting. But you know how it is. Like a lot of the things is here. He said, she said. Oh, my buddy did this in the gym. I worked with this guru, and it was fish and broccoli, and you know what I mean. The typical bodybuilding diets, right? Tons of cardio, and they don't really pay attention to efficiencies, performance in the gym, all these things that I think are major contributing factors that when you're trying to be the best of the best or get the most out of your body, right? So I think that's amazing that you guys are able to team up, and actually find the data and the proof, right, for what is most optimal. So, I'm sure there's some listeners out there that don't know much about the vertical diet. So maybe you could just just give us a brief sort of overview of what the vertical diet principles are.
Yeah, Damon, you mind kicking off on that?
Sure. So, like you mentioned earlier, thanks for having us on, by the way. It's great to spend time with you guys. Stan and I spent a lot of time going through this, and I should say that a lot of our principles come back to, some of that bro science was right, and we found that through the years with science that some of the concepts that have gone through and been tested now, there is some validity to some of those things that were just, he said, she said. That doesn't mean that they're all correct, right? But
Yes.
now we've taken the time and we've been able to take it into a lab and actually, really test those things. And one of those is sleep, which I know we touched on a little earlier. That is probably by far the number one thing that we talk about aside from compliance. So compliance is the science. That's our whole motto with the diet. So being consistent with something and sticking with something, but then the next would be sleep. There's actually a lot of data out there that just a slight difference in how much quality sleep somebody gets. And we're talking about the actual time that somebody is asleep, not just laying in bed. 8.5 hours versus 5.5 hours, there's a tremendous shift in the amount of fat that your body will burn and the amount of muscle your body will burn. And you start burning less fat and more muscle at that 5.5 hours versus the 8.5 hours. And so there's this, without getting too technical, there's a huge shift in your whole hormonal expression in the body. And that's one of the things that really pushes that. So a lot of the, people who are training really hard and really busy, sometimes will try to sacrifice sleep to try to do more throughout the day. And what we're learning is that may not be as productive as we once thought, and it may be counterproductive. So,
And
that's one.
Damon's master's thesis was on IGF-1 and insulin resistance as it
Mhm.
relates to sleep. And so, obviously, that's pretty well understood now. But we've gone through a couple of decades or more of telling clients to get up at 4 a.m. and do fasted cardio. And it was at the loss of muscle tissue and metabolism and insulin sensitivity. I said in many podcasts, if you're waking up at 4 a.m. to do cardio after 5 hours of sleep, you're stepping over $100 bills to pick up nickels.
It's crazy. I feel like there's actually like there's so many questions, and with the vertical diet and the principles, I feel like we're not going to be able to cover everything. So I think we should maybe cover like the importance of the sleep, because I think that's a major one. And like you said, insulin sensitivity is also something that I pay a big attention to. So let's expand a little bit more on the sleep. So that's something that I always push to clients too, because I'm big on efficiency, I'm big on performance. And, you know, one of the major problems I see with, if we're going to talk about bodybuilding specifically, obviously it's going to be different for, you know, when it comes to athletes. But when bodybuilders are preparing for a competition and they're on a calorie restricted diet and they're trying to get to very low levels of body fat, I don't see the benefit in going so low calories and getting your body to a point where it can't relax and then you can't sleep. You know, a lot of like friends of mine that are bodybuilders working with other coaches, I hear them and they're like, they don't sleep all night. They just sit there, they're on their phone, they can't relax, and they're eating 2,000 calories, right? Where me, I've found through trial and error that I actually like to eat a little bit of carbohydrates. I train early in the morning, so I structure my last meal of the day where I do have a little bit of carbohydrates, because I feel like it relaxes my body and I'm able to get a more restful sleep better. My quality of sleep is better when I gauge it. And I feel like the body's just going to be a lot more efficient that way. And I feel like just so many people don't understand the importance of getting great quality sleep. And like you said, you know, that just because the plan says I got to do my morning cardio at 5 a.m., they get up every morning and do their cardio at 5 a.m., where it would have been more efficient if they would have actually just got more sleep and just had a better training session that day, you know?
Yeah. And
So
the data really supports your approach with the carbohydrates. The way that it's discussed in the literature is they call it sleep onset latency. And what that means is how quickly do you actually fall asleep when you lay down? And they found that if you have simple carbohydrates within about 4 hours of the time that you're going to go to sleep, that sleep onset latency will be lower. And so you'll fall asleep faster.
So there actually is data and science showing that now.
Yes.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, because I remember when I used to train with other coaches in the past.
You know, and
Go ahead, Stan.
I was just going to say, we see it in blood tests all the time. I guess the obvious question here is with respect to you eating carbs in the evening. A lot of keto folks would be like, well, you don't need carbs. And that might be true biochemically. You don't need carbohydrates, but you don't need an elevator to get to the top of the Empire State Building. You can take the stairs. It's not the most efficient or effective way to train anaerobically in particular, and to support our goal, which is to maximize muscle tissue gain or retention for dieting. And there are, what I see in blood testing, because I've had well over 100 blood tests throughout my career, and I've reviewed hundreds and hundreds of them for my clients over the last 20 plus years. What we see is in people who over restrict carbohydrates, we start to see elevated fasted glucose in the morning, because the body will release cortisol to break down glucose from the liver. And so we start seeing an elevated cortisol, which can be catabolic as well for these people. So those are, which also adversely affect sleep. And so there's just some other things to consider hormonally in terms of, you know, what you said, you eat a little carbs before bed, it makes you sleep better, it makes you train better, but there's a whole host of physiological reasons for that.
Yes. And I think that's also something else. And, you know, I'd love to get your guys' take on this, because I actually had a podcast with Lee Norton and I kind of touched upon it with him, but I don't think he could really answer the question like he didn't really know. But I feel like also with dieting, I feel like there's more variables than just strictly like, you know, a lot of people will preach this whole like calories in, calories out. And I've seen with some clients before, when you get their bodies into a certain state and they'll be on low calories, I feel like the other variables as far as like cortisol and stress and all these other hormonal responses in the body can prevent your body from burning body fat or getting lean. So it's something that I've seen with talking to clients. I've been with other coaches. They come to me and they're like, I was doing 2 hours of cardio. I'm only eating 1,400 calories and they're not losing weight. And then you talk to some people like, that's physically impossible. They're cheating. They're cheating on their diet. But then you find out, oh, they're not sleeping. They're not eating any carbs. So their cortisol is probably through the roof. And I'm like, is there data to back up that if somebody's body is in that state of high stress, that it's going to push back and not burn body fat and sort of like be in this weird state of no progress?
Yeah. So yes and no. Let's kind of dissect. This is a great question because it seems to be a point of debate in the fitness world, the calories in, calories out, which it shouldn't be. So bottom line, that is calories in, calories out, the energy equation is absolutely the end all be all when it comes to gaining or losing weight. Now, having said that, there are several things, like you mentioned, that will affect that energy balance. And so it can be hormones, it can be activity, it can be sleep. Those will adjust either side of that balance. There are some data to support what you just mentioned, where you have somebody who's, potentially, I don't want to use the word overtraining, but they're training substantially. They're very calorically restricted. The data by, it was actually Nettle Shiva is the study in 2010 that looked at the sleep patterns of the 8.5 and 5.5. And so they concluded that if they were getting the 5.5 hours, it decreased the fraction of fat loss by 55%. And it increased the loss of fat-free body mass by 60%. So you had this full shift of, now you're losing less fat and losing more muscle, right? So you could have the instance at that point where, the scale will probably be moving, but then you become like the skinny fat look where you just look deflated and everybody knows what we're talking about that's been around the fitness world. So there are some data to support that, but I would say the bigger picture there that I think a lot of people forget is it's all about context and it's all about the individual person. And yes, those certain factors can influence the energy balance equation, but the energy balance equation is still what's like driving the truck. Okay. So you can get to a point where you've underconsumed and you've had some metabolic adaptation, and now your body is just at that point, because our body is designed to survive. And so if you take it to a point that's below survival levels, which that 1,400 calories would probably be for anybody, especially if they're training that much.
Yeah.
It's going to start reducing what it's willing to let go of.
Yeah.
And so just from a general physiological standpoint, muscle is very expensive in terms of energy. And for survival, the body is much more willing to give that up than it is, say, your stored body fat, because it doesn't know when you're going to feed it again. And it just knows that you has to go do this crazy amount of cardio and use a lot of energy. So it's going to take it from the place that your body will essentially triage that itself, right? And so that can affect weight loss and slow it down. But at the end of the day, I mean, not that we would do this, but if you took a bunch of people and put them on 500 calories and just completely starved them for a while, everybody's going to lose weight. It's actually been done in history. And it's, that was before we had regulations and things like that. But the energy balance is still the main driver.
Yeah. So something that I've...
Hey, Dorian.
Yep.
Let me just also say for the audience that there's a number of different ways in that energy balance equation that your body burns calories. Yes, your basal metabolic rate will slow as a result of eating fewer calories and just being in a deficit. And that can be hormonal. You can, you might have lower testosterone if you're a male. Women quite commonly get hypothyroidism. They get slow thyroid. But the biggest factor is what we call non-exercise activity thermogenesis. People who start to eat fewer calories and then crush themselves with exercise activity, such as the treadmill, then tend to come home and sit more, and it becomes a bit of a zero-sum game. And one of the interventions that I like to utilize when I get a competitor that's frantic 30 days out from a show, feels like they're in this starvation mode, which doesn't exist. They've already cut all the calories they can cut. They're already doing all the cardio that they can do, and I can't recommend them cutting more calories or doing more cardio. So I recommend a couple of things. I recommend they stay on their feet all day, which really helps in terms of non-exercise activity. And I recommend that they decrease the temperature of their sleeping environment and their housing environment and make it colder. And that may have, we do step counters as well, like the 8,000 steps a day.
Yeah.
What you find is that people, as they get into this starvation mode, they, and I'm using that term facetiously, that's just what you referenced, is that they end up just moving less throughout the day. And their hormones are affected, but if you applied an actual calorie count to hypothyroidism, as it relates to the basal metabolic rate, it's a very small amount, usually around 30, possibly in severe Hashimoto's up to 150 calories a day. That doesn't seem extraordinary. But as it applies to non-exercise activity, because hypothyroidism will make you very tired and you'll just sit around all day and your performance in the gym will suffer. And we haven't talked about it yet, but that becomes a really important component of lean mass retention while dieting, is that you maintain a similar level of performance, volume load, sets times reps times weight. If that is impacted significantly and your performance and your strength and your volume all decrease significantly, you'll start losing more and more muscle, along with what Damon mentioned in terms of the insulin resistance issues and the muscle being sacrificed simply from lack of sleep. So all of those factors are accounted for in the energy balance equation: total daily energy intake minus total daily energy expenditure. The expenditure component accounts for hormones, and it accounts for both exercise activity and non-exercise activity, and the thermic effect of food, which decreases because you're eating less, and your basal metabolic rate.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And one other thing that I wanted to ask you guys, if there's any data on this, is, obviously you guys recommend a solid, so 8.5 hours is the sweet spot for sleep at night.
We say somewhere between 7 and 9.
Okay, between 7 and 9. Obviously, to make that sleep optimal, things like blacking out the room, wearing earplugs, anything to make sure your body is in the deepest sleep possible, staying off your phone, making sure you're not looking at anything blue light, whether you want to wear blue light blocker glasses. I feel like that stuff all is going to be a contributing factor to putting your body in a deeper sleep. And one other thing I was wondering was, is it beneficial? Is there any data for athletes with these types of goals to take naps during the day? Or is that going to interrupt the quality of your sleep at night?
It depends. So it depends on when they take the nap and how long the nap is. Typically, if it's earlier in the day and it's less than a 30-minute nap, they're usually okay.
Okay.
If you have somebody that lays down and crashes out and 2 hours later, they're wondering what day it is and where they are, that's probably going to disrupt their sleep later on. So There's nothing wrong with naps. I would just try to reduce it to more of the power nap approach, less than 30 minutes.
Yeah, and the priority is
in our book. In our book, Damon and I put a whole chapter on sleep and include a sleep hygiene checklist, kind of listed in a hierarchy of most important to least important. One of the things that's at the top of that list, and you covered cool room, quiet room, dark room, blue lights. Those are very common problems with sleep. One of the things at the top of that list is to wake up at the same time every morning and try and get exposed to sunlight. Or even, off Amazon, you could get a 10,000 lux light if you're in a kind of a northern hemisphere and you don't have light in the morning. Eat breakfast in front of one of those for 30 minutes is a good idea. That sets your circadian clock, and then you build up what they call sleep pressure throughout the day. Naps relieve that pressure, so you want to have shorter naps taken earlier in the day in order to have sufficient sleep pressure, so that when it gets time to go to bed at night, then you'll fall asleep easier and stay asleep longer. Another couple of well-studied components in terms of sleep are cooling the core, and usually a warm shower before bed actually sounds counterintuitive, but it helps cool the core of the body. And if you get that core temperature to drop about a degree, you'll sleep better. And then a worry journal has good science behind it, just writing down on kind of a checklist of things that are on your mind, whether it's to-do items that you're hoping you don't forget for tomorrow or anything that stresses you out. Just write it on a piece of paper and set it on your nightstand, and that can actually help you to sleep. And a lot of people ask, the very next question is about what kind of supplements or medications they can take to help with sleep. I should mention that something like alcohol or marijuana might help you get to sleep, but it interferes with deep sleep and REM sleep, so the quality of the sleep is compromised. And so you have to be careful with alcohol. People drink a glass of wine at night and thinking that they're getting a health benefit for whatever reasons that it's been suggested. But in fact, it interferes with REM and deep sleep, and so that can make you not get the restorative sleep for your brain or your body. Beyond that, there's some limited evidence that melatonin works for some people. Mainly, its best benefit is in travel for things like jet lag. But on a consistent basis nightly, we just haven't seen enough evidence to suggest that the general population, some people will. And then maybe an anti-anxiety supplement like ashwagandha has a decent amount of research, but it's not a magic pill. Most of the prescription medications, the over-the-counter stuff, and the over-counter stuff generally will make you drowsy when you wake up in the morning. And so you'd like to resolve it without medication if possible. There really isn't anything, any great hack or magic trick in terms of supplements or medication for sleep.
Right. Very, very interesting. Yeah.
We actually have a lot of people who are using CPAPs also.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folks out there that have, obstructive sleep apnea that may not even be aware of it. And that can be it takes some getting used to, but it can be a huge life-changing device.
Yeah, I got one myself. I went for the testing about a year and a half ago, and they were like, "Oh, you're on the verge. Like, you could use one. You don't need one." So I got it, and I tried to use it, but I'm just like, it kept waking me up, and I just couldn't get used to it, So, but it's something I might try and
there are.
Back up.
We talk about that in the book. Of course, we work with a lot of big athletes. We mentioned Hawthorne, Brian Shaw, and NFL linemen like Lane Johnson and others. And they, generally speaking, when you get up north of 240, 250 plus, or even Jordan Fagenbaum from Barbell Medicine is only 198 pounds. Yeah. He wears a CPAP. He has a thick neck. He's a big squatter. And so it has to do with a crowded airway, not necessarily just your body fat percentage, but overall size. And what we find is that if you snore and wake up tired, and we did include a stop bang questionnaire, which is kind of helps you self-diagnose, then there's a good chance you might want to pursue getting a CPAP. In the absence of time or money, a lot of people internationally reach out to us from Australia or Canada or Europe, and they have socialized medicine, and so it can take a year or more just to get an appointment to get a sleep test, a sleep study, because they are expensive. And again, if it's only a moderate apnea, they might just recommend weight loss as opposed to prescribing a machine, because those too are expensive. So in many cases, I'll recommend folks just get on Craigslist and get a CPAP. I mean, the downsides are, the potential downsides are so minimal that, and the upside is so beneficial. One of the huge things that we recommend it for is it dramatically decreases blood pressure and blood thickness. You see people with high RBC, hemoglobin, hematocrit, especially in the performance-enhancing drug world.
That's why I was trying to take it, because I've suffered from high hematocrit and hemoglobin. So that was like one of the things where I'm going to give this a serious run and see if it helps bring that down. So it's funny you should say that.
Yeah, and I do happen to know, as you and I both know, a lot of the people who passed in the last couple of years were friends of ours, people we've trained with, people we know. And generally it's in the off season when they're at the heavy weights, 280, 290, 300 plus pounds. And in many cases, I've spoken to a lot of these people over the years, and they have not been wearing CPAPs regularly, and their blood pressure and blood viscosity has just continued to create these health problems for them. Having said that, CPAPs have gotten a lot better over the years. When I first got one in the early 90s, when my weight climbed over 250, it was a CPAP. It was continuous positive air. It was like driving down the freeway with no windshield. It was just
Yeah.
into your face the whole time.
There was no rhythm.
And
It was
now
just blowing.
they're called actually, there's no rhythm.
Yeah.
Now they're actually called BiPAPs. And when you exhale, they relieve the pressure. That there's a setting so you can adjust that to make the pressure relief better, so that they're a little easier to get adjusted to over time.
Yeah.
So we do, try and instruct people on how to best get comfortable with those masks, and the type of mask that you use can matter in terms of comfort. So
Yeah.
we work hard to try and get people to comply with that. It's kind of the foundation of everything that we do.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna fire mine up tonight, and I definitely got to get your guys' book and read all those tips on the sleeping, and I'll make sure we put the link here for your book, because I know there's a ton of valuable information in there. You guys mentioned insulin resistance, blood glucose, something that I've sort of paid attention to with clients, and I wanted to get your guys' opinion on this. Do you feel like if somebody has very good, BG levels meal to meal, is that a good indicator that their body is efficiently processing the carbohydrates and using them as energy? Do you feel like a blood glucose monitor is a good tool to gauge that and determine how many carbohydrates they can use meal to meal? If their levels are still high, I know you suggest like the 10-minute walks to bring it down. Do you feel that is a good indicator?
Again, it kind of depends. I know there's been a lot of use of the continuous glucose monitors, or CGMs, in the fitness world. We actually were doing some studies on our campus for a little while with them. The technology has come a long way, and I think they do a really good job of providing data. I don't know if it provides enough on its own, because you're essentially just looking at one biomarker in glucose. You're not also tracking insulin and other things. And to really do that well, you should be using a euglycemic clamp, which is not practical. But that's what we would use in research. And, there are some models that they've tried to put together on this. I think people get scared of any kind of glucose spike throughout the day, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. That's very normal depending on what they had to eat, to a degree, right? Yeah. I mean, if somebody's running really high all day long and then they have a meal and they go even higher, like that's bad, right? Yeah. But if you've got somebody who's, fasted and they're in the 70s, 80s for their glucose, and then they have a meal and they're up in the, 150s, that's still within normal. It's not, just ate. And then if it comes back down, that's what we're looking for really, is kind of okay, it went up. How long did it take?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. That's what I would gauge. It's like, with clients, I would gauge, if they're eating every 2 to 3 hours, I would want to know the data, like, hey, what is your blood glucose after that 2-hour mark or 3-hour mark? You know what I mean? If it's dropping too low, then I would be like, you know what, we need to introduce a little more carbs. If it's still high, I don't want it to compound meal to meal and be, just keep getting higher. So if it's getting too high, then I would use that as an indicator. Hey, we need to be a little more active between our meals, or we need to reduce, some calories or carbohydrates or whatever it be.
I will throw in there too, though. My dissertation research, I used carbohydrate mouth rinse on people. They were doing squatting and they were fasted. And there is a hyper reaction by the body to release glucose into the bloodstream under severe stress. And I experienced that in several of my participants, and it was very unexpected. And I couldn't tell who it was going to be. So the mouth rinse only had 6 grams of carbohydrates, and they didn't even swallow. But I had people go from low 90s fasted. They did this activity, did the swish and spit, all that. I checked their blood glucose, and they were over 200.
Yeah.
So and within, I would say, a couple of minutes, they were back to baseline. So, I mean, it was a very, very large release. And there isn't a whole lot of data out there. I mean, we do know that that's like a normal occurrence, that the liver will, regenerate this stuff into the bloodstream. But to that extent, there isn't a lot of data yet to kind of support why that's happening, or if that's even a problem. I mean, if you had a type 1 diabetic, that would probably be an issue, because their body doesn't have the mechanism to do that. But these folks were not diabetic. And, it's something that I think sheds light on. We may not have all the answers
Yeah.
for all that stuff.
Yeah.
In general, I think your approach is probably, pretty sound.
Yeah, I feel like it's a tool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just like you check your weight every other day or whatever. It's a tool, right?
Yeah.
You're
So,
gathering data and analyzing it. And I think from that standpoint, that's a great approach.
yeah, yeah.
A lot of things came up there. I just want to hit them real quick. In the general population, in terms of weight loss, continuous glucose monitors, we've not seen in the research that they benefit. They're more advantageous than in the absence of one, and so your obesity specialists will suggest that it's not an effective tool. But like you mentioned, in terms of the scale or in terms of glucose monitors for competitive athletes, it might be something, like an Oura Ring or whatever. It might be something that we could fine tune for a small percentage of the people in terms of your blood sugars. We also, in the book, in addition to our sleep hygiene, we have a chapter on health where we have a high blood pressure quick fix kit. And again, we create a hierarchy, a step-by-step of the action items that you should focus on in order to reduce blood pressure. And of course, sleep apnea is at the top of that list, along with hypothyroidism and weight loss and those kinds of things. But another big component is high blood sugars. That's when you start to have hyperinsulinemia, especially as it can start to affect the kidneys, you're going to have elevated blood sugars. And so we have another high blood sugar quick fix kit to specifically address that, as it's seen to be such a large contributor to a whole host of metabolic problems, fatty liver disease and type 2 diabetes, etc. One of the things that we talk about, we also have a whole chapter on blood testing. You can look at things like fasted glucose and HA1C, hemoglobin A1C, on a blood test.
Yep.
And those can be in the normal range for many years, if not a couple of decades, while you still have some issue with insulin resistance. While you're and a continuous glucose monitor might show you that. Another thing that might show you that is what we call leading indicators, such as high triglycerides or high fasted insulin. Those would be numbers that would tell us, okay, we have some glucose regulation issues that we should address. And then your intervention could be some of those things that we put on our list for a high blood sugar quick fix kit. Obviously, sleep is a huge one. We talked about how insulin resistance can occur in just one night of poor sleep. Weight loss is another huge one, obviously. Any kind of diet, as long as it's calorie deficit, doesn't matter where carbs or fats are, can result in a similar reduction or improvement in blood sugars. Another one is just eating protein first in a meal. We're seeing more and more of this recently. Can help ameliorate some of the peak spike of glucose and the duration of elevation, which right behind that, of course, insulin's chasing. And we look at what we call the area under the curve in terms of how high the insulin spikes and how long it stays elevated. And it's that area under the curve that kind of dictates, health problems long term. Another one, if I can recall, as I'm walking through this, the 10-minute walk is a huge piece. It's actually twice as effective as metformin, which is the number one prescribed type 2 diabetes medication in the world to prevent or reverse type 2 diabetes. Metformin, to 10-minute walk post meal, somewhere within 30 minutes or so, is twice as effective because it helps reduce the peak and duration of glucose elevation.
And is that after every meal? Is that after every meal or just a couple meals?
It would depend. Someone bodybuilding certainly wouldn't need that kind of intervention unless they had. It would be pretty rare that a body.
Yeah, but in an extreme case,
muscle is a sink for glucose. Mm-hmm. In an extreme case, in the off season, if you had somebody that was having blood sugar regulation issues, yes, so you would do it after every meal. And it's far better than one 30-minute bout or 40-minute bout at the end of the day, because one bout at the end of the day doesn't address the spike, as Damon said, the acute elevation of blood sugars post-meal. They call it postprandial. glycemia. And so the 10-minute walk helps reduce those blood sugars by, I think, 30% on is what some of the literature suggests. And so those are some of the components of the high blood sugar quick fix kit that we implement to have pretty immediate impact. It's also important, and we address this in the book, that the glycemic index of a food is really worthless, to be honest. It was created in the absence, in isolation of consuming carbs by themselves, in the absence of proteins and fats, and so it's not valid. And what we're seeing with continuous glucose monitors is that people respond differently to different carbs. Different people do. One person might eat a potato and be fine. Another person might shoot up to 200. So it's so individualistic, and under those circumstances, it might be beneficial to use one just so you can figure out what your own triggers are. But there's other variables like glycemic load. How much of the carbohydrate do you consume?
Yes.
And again, how much protein was in the meal, how much fat was in the meal.
Yeah. As soon as you're adding,
so there's a lot of variables.
Yeah, as soon as you're adding protein, fat, and carbs together, it totally eliminates any type of insulin response you're going to get from a higher glycemic carbohydrate on its own. Because who's eating just straight white rice on its own? You know what I mean? As far as an athlete goes, we're all adding.
Somebody is out there.
Yeah, but we're all adding, right? Yeah, it's funny. One question I just came to me, and because it came up recently, someone asked me about it. I had someone send me an Instagram message because I manage a whole bunch of coaches, and maybe he'll see this, and I kind of didn't have the answer for him. And it got me thinking, and he was like, based on my blood type, I can only do red meat because I'm, blah, blah, blah blood type. Do you think that there's any benefit to eating for your blood type? Is that proven? Is that legitimate? Or is that just hocus pocus? And we're back. Okay. So yeah, you can keep going, Damon.
Damon was talking about blood type.
Yes.
Yeah, so as of right now, we don't have the data to support that approach. And it's kind of the same thing. You hear a lot of stuff with gut microbiome, and we discussed that a lot in our book. What I'll say about all of that is that the data and the science and the technology hasn't quite reached a point where it's definitive for us to use it clinically. It's just not answering enough of the questions.
Okay.
There's just way too many variables that aren't accounted for. I know there's a ton of people out there that will promote those types of diets or approaches.
Yeah.
It comes back to compliance. If one of those approaches is an approach that somebody can follow and they can do it really well, and it's not creating any kind of nutrient deficiencies, that's great. If it works for them, awesome.
Yeah.
But there isn't an advantage to doing something based on your blood type in terms of a diet versus just being consistent with eating well.
We have, Dorian, we have an entire section on myths, MYTHS,
awesome.
Myths in the fitness industry.
This is awesome.
Just a shameless plug, but there's an entire section.
When did you guys come out with this book? How long has it been out?
It's just been out about 4 months or so.
It was
actually the number one new release in diet books on Amazon for the full 30 days.
It's available on Amazon. I got to get this today.
It's available on Amazon.
Every major retailer, Barnes & Noble.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's awesome.
But it's interesting when you ask questions about blood type diets, and even what is that? The ectomorph, mesomorph, endomorph, the body type diets. Yeah. And there's all sorts of, and we go through in great detail, dispelling all those myths, attaching all of the literature on that. But the myths, you could spend an entire podcast just talking about the myths.
Honestly, guys, what you guys are doing, this is unbelievable. And I think it's just priceless, the knowledge and information and data you guys are putting out, because I just look at me growing up and coming up, and I hired all these different nutritionist gurus, whatever. And I just feel like people are so privileged right now to have people like yourselves doing the research, putting it out there, and then having it packaged in this book that they can purchase and just get all this amazing information and save them years and years and years of mistakes. So I really encourage everyone to grab the book.
It is. Damon really expanded this. I mean, it's over 240 pages with over 500 references.
Wow.
And we dig down into the nitty gritty. You talk about guru diets or nutritionist diets or the bodybuilding figure physique bikini industry that I've been a part of since 1986 when I first competed.
Yeah.
And I saw all these things happening and I experienced them myself. I made all the same mistakes multiple times. These over restrictive diets, the egg white tilapia broccoli diets. I've done those and I've had clients do those. And I saw nothing but problems. And for so many years, it was isolated to that industry, which was a small group of people. But this industry has exploded in the last 10 years. It's incredible what's happened. Bodybuilding, figure, physique, bikini, wellness. And unfortunately now, the general population has started to see these women in the best shape of their lives on stage and started copying those same horrendous diets. And yes, we've said the best diet's the one you'll follow. And, all diets work when they're strictly adhered to, and you can certainly lose weight on those diets. But what types of problems occur? What kind of, health issues manifest as a result of the deficiencies in things like biotin and iron and B12 and zinc? And I go back and look at, I didn't invent this. Vince Gironda was talking about this in the 60s. Wow. When I was reading up back in the late 80s about dieting, Vince Gironda's information was there. Whole eggs, steak. He was even talking about iodine back then for dieters who had hypothyroidism as a result of sweating out all of their iodine and not consuming, adequate electrolytes. And I've just been really vocal about the fact that I think that these guru diets are hurting people. And we see it post-contest in particular, when they end up at the doctor's office getting treatment for amenorrhea and for low iron and for calcium deficiencies. Yeah, the female triad. And we see these women getting injections for B12 and vitamin D and iron, and we also see them getting antidepressants, and we also see them suffering from massive amounts of edema and weight regain, and it's tragic. And so, Damon and I've worked hard to try and be very vocal about the fact that it's unnecessary. You can achieve the same level of conditioning, we think superior, far superior, maintain more lean body mass, have better sleep, have fewer, obviously the last 30 days is it's, as I said in one of my videos, if you want to be healthy, don't compete. Yeah. And, people will make some sacrifices to fit in any sport, whether it's, a 13-year-old gymnast in the Olympics getting surgery for, their wrists or their ankles, their Achilles tendons, etc., or even a 10-year-old badminton player getting, lateral collateral ligament surgery because they blew out from repetitive strain. Just any sport, it doesn't matter. If you want to be healthy, don't compete. And so what Damon and I try and do a lot is mitigate damage. We get blood tests and we make recommendations with things like, blood pressure and CPAPs and, maintaining a nutrient-dense whole food diet that doesn't exclude the things that your guru will tell you to exclude. And here's a list we're all familiar with. Stop eating red meat. Stop eating fruit. Stop eating dairy. Stop salting your food. These are the first things we hear from these.
The salt kills me. I'm like,
yes.
I feel like 98% of people are dehydrated and don't know it. And I'm just like, I was talking to a very, very high level athlete last year who competes at the Olympias, won the Olympia.
Yeah.
And he didn't have any salt in his meals. Didn't salt one meal ever for years. I'm like, you living under a rock, man? I'm like, you don't like, I couldn't believe it. I was blown away. It's absolutely crazy.
Some people are successful in spite of themselves, but so that's the first thing we did when we intervened is we said, look, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever to cut out red meat. I dieted Nadia Wyatt, who took third in the Miss Olympia, to get stage ready, and she was absolutely bone shredded. And she ate red meat, she ate steak all the way to the day of the show. I have pictures of every single meal that she ate. Wow. She ate fruit, she ate potatoes, she salted her meals. And here's the kicker. Her cardio for the last 3 months before the show, quote unquote cardio, consisted of 3 10-minute walks a day. That was it. That was
Amazing.
all she did for cardio. We had her lifting weights if we wanted to burn more calories and create a calorie deficit. She'd just do AM PM splits. Stephanie
Yeah.
Sanzo, a popular fitness influencer out of
Yeah,
Australia, was the
Australia.
same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, when she came to me, she was doing 2 a day cardio, 40 minutes twice a day. Now she does 3 10-minute walks, and she goes in and lifts weights. She loves to lift weights.
Focuses on performance and trains her ass off.
Focuses on training. Yep.
Yeah.
And she's performed much, much better as a result. And we threw back in. Now she's eating red meat every day. She's eating fruit every day. She's salting her meals. She's eating dairy.
Amazing.
Calcium's very important. So
Yeah.
that's the diet in a nutshell. It's highly bioavailable, micronutrient dense, easy to digest foods. That's kind of another component that is that easy to digest. We try and find foods that don't cause you a lot of gastric distress, particularly for those people with IBS and serious digestion issues.
Do you feel like
we cover all of that?
Do you feel like with the calcium though, like you have to be very mindful of your K2 intake? Like if you're eating a lot of dairy and you are having high amounts of calcium, do you think it's important to make sure that your K2 is in line with your calcium to prevent any calcification in the arteries?
Damon, you want to jump in there? One thing is that vitamins you get from food don't have the same impact as supplements. Calcium supplements can cause a bigger problem. Too high of vitamin D can cause calcium to be overstored. And there's there's K2 in whole eggs. There's K2 in other sources. But Damon, go ahead and jump on that because calcium's so important.
Yeah.
It really depends on the person and if they have any kind of predisposition to that kind of stuff. It is really what it comes down to.
Okay.
Most people, if they're highly active, they'd really have to overdo it. We get this question a lot on oxalates too. And it goes back to, personal medical history. What do they have going on? Are they predisposed to, forming stones or calcification deposits or things like that? It really, everybody's going to be a little bit different. And so, it just goes back to they're going to track themselves and kind of see, what their body is able to handle and continue to reassess that. People can't just go get one.
You got to monitor it year to year, right, and see the cause and effects and make the proper adjustments.
So being consistent with the program as well as being consistent with the overall, evaluation of it.
Yeah.
So.
Another question I had, because I 100% agree with you, the red meat, red meat having way more micronutrients in it than obviously eating chicken breasts or egg whites, which is just empty. But my biggest issue with eating red meat is because of my hematocrit and hemoglobin is the iron content. And I'm worried about having too high a ferritin, which is going to then, play a role in having higher hematocrit hemoglobin. Do you guys feel like that is a concern for someone that has those levels elevated?
Again, depends on the person, but you could consume some calcium with that meal, and that will actually block some of the absorption of the iron. So if you have
and
some
reduce,
so like do some yogurt with it, or okay,
and reduce vitamin C consumption with that meal. Vitamin C and reduce non-heme sources. So if you have a heme and a non-heme iron source with vitamin C, that's going to maximize iron absorption. And so if you want to minimize iron absorption, you'd minimize with the particular meal. This is specific to that meal. You'd minimize the vitamin C, minimize the non-heme iron, and add in calcium, and that would help. You were smart to say that you look at ferritin, because sometimes people assume that RBCs, hemoglobin, and hematocrit immediately signal high iron, and they don't, because there's a difference between polycythemia and erythrocytosis. One would require donation, one would not necessarily. People in high altitude like Denver will have elevated red blood cells, but not necessarily have a high iron, and you have to be careful in terms of over-donating, and we address that in the book as well, particularly for people using performance-enhancing drugs who would have an elevated RBC, hemoglobin, and hematocrit. You do need to look at your platelets and your ferritin in order to determine whether or not you're going to donate. Otherwise, you will impair performance. Your cardiovascular fitness will suffer significantly. I never have an athlete donate blood 30 days prior to a competition, particularly one that would require any kind of cardiovascular fitness. So that's in the book as well. It's a deeper dive, but those are smart things. Get a blood test, look at your RBC, hemoglobin, hematocrit, and then try and utilize the information that we provide to as to whether or not you would donate.
Yeah.
Chris Masterjohn did an interesting. He has hemochromatosis, a genetic predisposition for elevated iron absorption and retention, and he prefers to eat the red meat because of all of the micronutrients that it provides. In a more bioavailable form, the iron, the B12, the zinc, the creatine, and all of those things that are superior, plus the superior fatty acid composition of omega-6 to omega-3 as compared to, say, chicken or pork. He prefers to eat the red meat and then have a periodic donation based on his blood test results. Every 90 days or so, he would just donate. And that is certainly a reasonable method. Now, again, don't overdonate, only when it's warranted for those people for whom it's warranted.
Yes. Wow. Guys, I could honestly sit here and ask you guys about a million questions, and I know we've this is going on, so I'm gonna ask one more question because I really appreciate your guys' time, and I just encourage everyone to buy the book. You guys have to learn about the vertical diet. There's a lot of principles in there that I've followed myself. I've learned so much from following Stan. And the last question I wanted to ask you guys was, is there any data, and does it matter meal consumption wise? Because I bounced around this myself personally, and sometimes I try it. In meal volume, 5 meals, 6 meals. Sometimes I personally feel I do the 6 meals because that's what we've been told. You know what I mean? For all these years, bro science. But sometimes I feel like actually doing larger portions and allowing a little more time between the meals, my stomach, my digestive system, things just feel a little bit more efficient. Is there any benefit to spreading, if you're eating 3,500 calories, spreading it out over 4, 5, or 6 meals?
So yes, there is data. And again, it's going to be a little bit individualized on this. It used to be for a while there, people were told they had to eat like every 2 hours, and that was the most efficient way to get all the nutrients out of your meal and digest it and absorb it all. And what we're finding is that there's a refractory period on your stomach. And so what that means is that when you take in a meal, you're going to have this stimulation in your stomach. You're going to release gastric juices to help break it down, to digest it. And then that goes into your small intestine, and that's where most of the nutrients are getting absorbed. So if you eat every 2 hours, that's probably too short of a time period for your stomach to reset, and you won't get that full response from the stomach from that next meal. So it may not break down and digest completely. So it could potentially reduce some of the absorption. So what we're finding in the data is that probably the ideal sweet spot is 3 to 5 meals a day spread 3 to 5 hours apart. And that's about the right balance for that refractory period. Now, if you're somebody calories are still king, right? So if you're somebody that's trying to gain weight, or you're just a large person that needs to take in 5,000 plus calories,
Then, you're going to need more meals probably.
Right. And so from that standpoint, get your calories. But if it's doable, 3 to 5 meals, there's no reason to go out of your way to eat every 2 hours. There's no advantage to it.
I feel like it actually, honestly, it irritates my digestive system, my gut, and I'm actually dealing with a lot more inflammation by the time meal 6 comes along. I'm going to bed and I'm like, why is my stomach inflamed and I have all this inflammation in my gut? And I feel like because it's just an overdrive, it's basically in a state of digestion all day. And then it starts getting me wondering, like, if my stomach is just in a constant state of digestion, is that interfering with other things in the body and healing and, other things that are required, right? So it was a question that I've been on my mind for a long time. So it's nice to get that sort of clarity. And another thing is protein consumption. Obviously, guys that are using performance enhancing drugs, you can absorb more protein, your protein synthesis. But is it a major concern if someone's trying to get, say upwards of 300 grams of protein, and they're only going to eat 4 meals a day, and they divide that into 4? Is there a point of no return with protein where their bodies simply can't absorb it, or will it partition it just over those 4 or 5 hours if they're spread out?
So this is one of those kind of myths that's out there. I think Lane actually just covered this not too long ago in one of his
Okay.
videos. And in terms of absorption, you're basically going to absorb it all, right? So it's all going to get into your bloodstream. It's what your cells will actually be able to utilize, and that's going to be different based on the meal, the timing, what you just did, your activity level. If you just had a hard training session, you're probably going to take in more into the cell. You're probably going to have, more utilization of the actual protein, but you'll absorb basically all of it. It's going to come back to the digestibility score of the protein, because not all of them are 100%. And that's getting really deep into the weeds. But at the end of the day, there's not a problem breaking that into 4 meals, as long as it's not causing indigestion from having a large meal, because sometimes we'll see this, with GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. If it's creating a problem where people are eating a large meal later in the day, laying down, and all of a sudden they're experiencing GERD, then you're probably going to want to split that into smaller meals throughout the day. So
yeah,
really
we also have a repair kit for GERD. We work hard to get all of our clients off of antacid medications, because it impairs protein
people that
breakdown
eat
and
Tums
absorption.
drive me bananas.
It's crazy.
They're like, I got acid reflux, I'm using Tums. I'm like, great, it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. That's what they're designed to do. It's going to give you temporary relief. Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's a big myth. Damon talked about in terms of protein absorption. You'll absorb 100% of what you eat. Now, whether or not you'll get any additional muscle protein synthesis benefit from it is suspect once you exceed, say, 40 grams of protein per meal. You're going to max out your muscle protein synthesis, but the additional protein will still be absorbed and utilized. It's still calories. And there's other things in muscle that your protein's good for. Just your skin and hair and nails, and of course even your blood cells, white and red both. And
your immune system.
Your bones. People think that calcium is for bones, but calcium and protein and some sort of loading is optimal for bone growth. But that's one of the myths we have in here. 2 meals a day or 6 meals a day. If you equate for calories and protein, you're going to get similar weight loss and body composition. There has been some research recently. When you drop down to 1 meal a day, you might experience a little more lean muscle tissue loss with weight loss. But the ISSN, International Society of Sports Nutrition, does recommend for that small population, the ones we're probably talking to, who really wants to maximize muscle growth or performance, that 3 meals is probably better than 2. 4 might not be that much better than 3, but why not? The ISSN kind of recommends 4 evenly spaced, 40 grams of protein intake throughout the day to just be kind of on that edge of what's optimal. 5 probably not better than 4, and 6 probably not better than 4 either. Somewhere in 3 or 4 meals, because there's no mechanism in the body to store protein, and so in the absence thereof, your body's going to have to wait for the available amino acids before making the repair or performing the hypertrophy. And that's not to say you're going to lose 10 pounds of muscle, but we're in the business where, we want to maximize the opportunity, of everything that we do.
And we should preface that with high quality protein. You're trying to get 30 to 40 grams of high quality protein.
Full of micronutrients and not just your egg whites or, things that are empty.
And then I want to throw in here, I know we've run long, but I want to throw in here because there is a significant body of research that shows if you equate for calories and protein, and one group eats egg whites and the other group eats whole eggs, the whole egg consumers have a significantly better hypertrophy and strength outcome from their training. Now, we thought it was possibly micronutrients, but it seems like cholesterol might actually be the reason that there's a superior performance benefit. And it's been numerous studies now. And so, I wouldn't avoid whole eggs for that benefit in particular.
Wow, this is so much great information. I think people are going to love this. And I'm first thing I'm doing is I'm ordering the book. I'm hoping Amazon here in Canada has it so I can get it tomorrow. I really appreciate it.
At StanEfferding.com has ebook as well, and but Damon and I worked hard to get this the hard copy out there, and they did a great job. It's beautiful.
Awesome. I really appreciate you guys taking the time and having you on. I know everyone's going to love this, and I'm sure there's going to be a million other questions they're going to be asking. So, guys, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invite,
Thank
brother.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.